Discovery Plus has released a docu-series called Hillsong, a Megachurch Exposed. I finally had the chance to watch it, and I had a couple people ask me what I thought about it, so here we go, my thoughts on the documentary. Now, the people who put this docu-series together did not give a balanced and fair perspective of Hillsong Church or its leaders. They obviously had an agenda and story they wanted to tell, so they only included the people and stories that fit their narrative. And with a church the size of Hillsong, it's not hard to get a group of disgruntled former members together to bash the church. I think you could do a docu-series like that on just about any church in America. You know, the only high-level leaders in the docu-series were the former pastors of Hillsong Ukraine, and the rest were from a couple students from their college and some volunteers. I actually have a member of my church attending Hillsong College in Arizona right now, and he's had an incredible experience. He has nothing negative to say about his time in the school or serving in the church. So I don't think that the docu-series gives an accurate view of Hillsong Church as a whole. So remember, when you are watching, that it only presents one side of the story. Plus, outside of the, Ukraine pastors, the rest of the people in the video have no idea what it's like to pastor and lead a church. So it's difficult to critique someone if you've never walked in their shoes or seen things from their perspective. So as a pastor, I thought I'd share with you my opinion on this documentary because I know what it's like to lead a church. Now, I'm not a pastor of a mega church, but I am a pastor, and so I know kind of the thought processes behind some of the decisions that we make as leaders and as churches that might help bring some balance to this series. So I'll tell you what I didn't like about the series, what I was kind of conflicted about, what still might be up in the air, and what I thought were some potentially very serious problems within Hillsong. Now, my biggest problem with the docu-series comes down to judgment, right? In Scripture, we're called to judge with righteous judgment, right? So we can judge actions as right or wrong. We can judge what somebody does as righteous or unrighteous, but we can't judge the motives behind someone's action. Like when you claim to know why somebody did what they did, you've entered into the kind of judgment that the Bible prohibits, right? Only God knows the motives of a person's heart, which is why this type of judgment is reserved for God and God alone. And this series was based primarily on judging the motives of Hillsong and its leaders. 1 Corinthians 13:7 says this in the Amplified Bible: "Love bears up under anything and everything that comes, is ever ready to believe the best of every person. Its hopes are fadeless under all circumstances, and it endures everything without weakening." So love believes the best in every person. This series did the opposite of that with Hillsong. Instead of giving Hillsong the benefit of the doubt, instead of believing the best and giving them the most generous explanation for their behavior, they gave them the most uncharitable explanation for every action this church and all of its leaders have taken, from the music to the church to the conferences and even the college. For example, they said that their music is to lure people into their church. And so they write this music, to kind of stir up people's emotions, to make them think that they're having an encounter with God when they're not really experiencing God at all, right? And that claim was based entirely on judging the motives behind their music, and it wasn't a fair judgment. We don't know why they released the music that they put out, other than I've had encounters with God while listening to their music. The people in my church have been moved deeply by the words and the lyrics of these songs. They weren't worked up into an emotional frenzy at one of their concerts. They've encountered Jesus while singing these songs and worshiping in their cars. And so it's really unfair to say that their music is nothing more than, some plot to try and get young people into their church. They said Hillsong is only focused on one thing, and that is growth, right? Building their empire all over the world. But that is kind of the Great Commission, right? To go into all the world and preach the gospel. As believers, we're called to take the gospel into every nation. As a pastor, right, I want to reach people who are far from God. I want my church to grow. Not so that I can have a mega church, but I want my church to grow, because a growing church means that you're reaching people with the good news of God's grace. And so the documentary attributed the most selfish motives for Hillsong's desire to grow and to expand into different nations and to reach people. This series talked a lot about money and how Hillsong is a money-making machine. They made it seem like everything they do to reach people is for the sole purpose of making more money. Once again, it was an assumption that they made that was not backed up by a lot of evidence. They didn't really show or portray, the elaborate and lavish lifestyles of their leaders. There were, a couple pictures of people wearing $500 shoes and stuff like that, but, not enough evidence to support that everything that they have been doing for the last, 30, 40 years has just been to try to get more money. They said that Hillsong uses celebrities to amass power. Obviously celebrities came to their church, especially Hillsong New York, but I don't think that you can say that they intentionally targeted these celebrities to try and gain power and influence. They talked about the celebrity seating at Hillsong New York, and one guy said that he got in trouble for seating a regular person in the VIP section. And so he kind of presented it like they had this kind of two-tier system at their church, where you had, the celebrities, the VIPs in one section, and then all the common people in the other. And that could very well be the case. Hillsong New York, under Carl's leadership, could have shown preferential treatment to celebrities, but having a section reserved for celebrities doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. We don't have a VIP section at our church, but we do have one celebrity who attends our church, and it's difficult for him and his family to come to church because people are trying to, take pictures of him and his family during worship. He's been followed out to his car. He's been asked to sign autographs. He has to, sneak into church just before the service starts, and he has to sneak out just before service ends so he doesn't get harassed by people. I kind of understand the idea of having a kind of celebrity section, especially if you have as many, high-profile celebrities as they had in their church, right? These celebrities need a safe place where they can come to church without being harassed by other people. So I get having a place just for them where they can be themselves and worship Jesus without people snapping pictures of them and asking, them to sign autographs. So that in and of itself isn't a bad thing, right? So there was a lot of judgment in this series. They assigned the worst possible motives to every single thing Hillsong Church did, and I don't think that was fair at all. Now, there were some things in the series that I had kind of mixed feelings about. I had mixed feelings about the Carl Lentz part of the series. Obviously, what Carl did was wrong, and he needed to be removed from leadership. But I don't think Carl was some evil person out to deceive and lead people astray. They made it seem like he was some sort of, predator from the very beginning when he started off in his early days as a young adult pastor at Wave Church. I think Carl started out in ministry with the best intentions. I believe he genuinely wanted to help people, and I think that's why he preached a lot about sexual purity, but in the end, he failed to live up to the standards that he set, which we've all done before. And that's what he said in his public apology, that, his, work relationship with God balance got out of whack, and he prioritized the wrong things in his life that ultimately led to his downfall. Now, when you are in leadership, you can't afford to make those kinds of mistakes. And so he was rightfully terminated. And so I think, Carl Lentz is a cautionary tale to all ministers and pastors to make sure that your heart stays pure, to guard against gold, girls, and glory, because if you don't, these things will take you out. In fact, I just did a video on why pastors fall. I'd encourage you to check out that video. I'll put it in the description box below for you to watch. Another thing that this series brought up was the misuse of church funds. There seemed to be some misuse of church funds where people were allowed to use the church credit card to buy, clothes and expensive things for themselves. Hillsong came out and condemned that practice. So, I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if it was like a one-time thing or if this was something that was a regular practice in their church, but it seems like the church was against this practice. And I don't know if this was something that was kind of systemic that happened at every campus, or if it was just something that, a group of pastors at one church were doing. Obviously they had, some of the pictures and videos of pastors wearing, $100 shoes and, $10,000 hoodies. And while that is not necessarily sinful, it is a bad look, and when we come to how pastors and leaders in church, use money, I think there's a couple things you have to look at is how was this money earned, was it through investments that they made, or was it strictly through the salary that the churches paid them? And so you have to look at not how much money they have and what they have, but where that money came from. But here's my thing, even if you have the money, spending thousands of dollars on clothing and shoes and stuff like that, it's just a bad look. And so it's not necessarily sinful, but it doesn't look good. One of the things that was kind of concerning to me was having the students in the college sign an NDA. That was kind of a red flag for me. Having 18 to 22-year-olds sign a document just didn't sit right with me, but they might have a simple explanation for that. But, like I said, Hillsong didn't really get to share their side, and that's what made this entire documentary, really difficult to watch, because they didn't allow them to present their case for their actions. And then there were all the things about the pastors being fired for misconduct. You had Carl Lentz, you had another pastor in New Jersey, and then the Hillsong pastors in Dallas. So you could say that there is a cultural problem within the leadership of the church, or it's just that the sheer size of the church would naturally have more people getting fired for misconduct. I mean, this is a church with 29 locations all over the world, right? An organization that size will have more misconduct to deal with than a church of just a couple hundred people from the sheer size of the organization. So I can't really speak definitively on whether or not the moral failures within the church are part of a cultural problem, or if it's just that the sheer size of the staff would lead to more misconduct. Obviously, the more staff you have, the more staff problems you're going to encounter. Which brings me to the biggest issue raised by this series, and that is how Hillsong responded to misconduct. There was the issue where the college student was sexually assaulted by a staff member. She came forward, and nothing happened until her father got involved. And then the church seemingly lied about when the report was brought to them, and then, it was taken to the police, right? There should have been an immediate disciplinary action brought against that staff member. He should have been terminated for that. It seemed like there were issues with Carl Lentz before the scandal that they talked about in the series. And it seems like some of these issues were brought to leadership, but they didn't address those behaviors. And so that kind of toxic behavior continued, ultimately leading to the affair. And then the biggest scandal is Brian Houston's father sexually abusing children and it not being reported to the authorities when it was discovered. Frank was let go by the church, but sexual assault, especially of a minor, must be reported. To me, that is the most incriminating piece of evidence brought up in this documentary. It looks like they covered up their father's crimes instead of reporting them, and it seemed like there was a lot of evidence to support the cover-up. Now, I can't make a definitive statement on that issue as it's now playing itself out in the court. And so we'll see, and we'll let the courts decide on whether or not Hillsong took the appropriate action when they were made aware of Frank's crimes, or if they tried to cover it up. And based on the evidence presented in the docuseries, it's not looking good for Brian Houston. But then again, that was only one side of the story, and so he'll get his chance to defend his actions in court. So do I think Hillsong is a cult out to deceive people? No. Even if, many of the things that were said in this video were true, it does not speak to all the staff and the leaders at Hillsong as a whole. I think, speaking collectively as the organization as a whole, I believe there are many people who have a genuine heart to reach people. There's always going to be, misconduct in staff and leadership, especially the larger you are as a church. The more misconduct you have, the more, mess you're going to have to deal with in those people. But it's always important to respond to misconduct immediately, to take every allegation of sexual assault and misconduct seriously, properly investigating and taking the right course of action and relaying the information that needs to be relayed to the authorities. And that was probably the most concerning part of the documentary to me. But like I said, it's playing itself out in court, and so we'll see how it is. But I do think that Hillsong is a genuine church that has a heart and a desire to reach people with the good news of God's grace. And I don't think that this documentary presented them in the best light. I don't think it was a fair and balanced expose on this church. Anyways, those are my thoughts on the docuseries. I'd love to hear what you thought about it in the description box below. If you found this video helpful, do me a favor, smash that like button for me. Share this video with a friend. If you haven't already yet, subscribe to this channel. And remember, if it's not good, God's not done. Thanks for watching.